Although the white Christians of Spain deeply desired, during this entire period, to expel the blackamoors from their country, it is nevertheless an undisputed historical fact that medieval Spain was the cultural, educational, and scientific center of Europe. The Moorish kings lived in castles of highly polished marble, with elaborately carved walls and beautiful mosaic floors, while European kings lived in cold, damp castles of unfinished stone, crude by comparison. The streets of Spain's capital city, Cordova, were well paved and completely illuminated by public lights, at a time when the streets of London were dark and covered with mud. The Moors possessed all the knowledge of ancient Greece, which was lost to Europe until the Renaissance. They made important contributions to philosophy, medicine, mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, and botany. Doesn't sound like such a dark age after all, does it? There were academies for the rich, free schools for the poor, and libraries containing books from all over the world. The Jews of medieval Spain got along famously with the Muslims, and for them the sojourn in that nation is remembered as being the second most glorious period in their history, exceeded only by the glory of the reigns of David and Solomon in ancient Israel. Medieval Spain was the time and place of Maimonides and many of the other great Old Testament scholars whose works constitute the foundations of modern Jewish thought. Throughout the Middle Ages, the white Christians of Spain endeavored to thrust out the Moors. It took them until 1492 to do that. When Isabella and Ferdinand finally defeated the last Moorish king in Granada, in the same year that they financed Columbus's trip to America, they immediately expelled all Jews who refused to accept Christianity. This is not at all surprising. Since the Jews had actively supported the Moorish conquests, the Christians were not about to take any chances on losing what had taken them 800 years to regain. The day the last Moors and Jews were expelled from Spain was counted as a great day in Spanish history. But was it? It's true that Spain, largely through the strength of its navy, had achieved the status of a world power. But in less than a century, the Spanish Armada was defeated by England, and the nation went into a great decline. Now we're going to ask a very important question. During the Middle Ages, were Spain's Muslim rulers really black? It's almost inevitable that white people who have never been taught black history will ask this question. Were they really black? After all, Moors are kind of Arabic. They're not really Negro, are they? And the answer to the question is that there was more than one race involved. Again, as I told you before, in the beginning there was the Umayyad dynasty, and they were mainly Arabic, although there were some blacks there. But by about the time of the Crusades, the Umayyad dynasty became soft and complacent, and the forces of Christianity were rising up in Spain and threatening to overthrow Islam. A second dynasty of kings arose called the Almoravids. They came out of Senegal, which is right in the middle of Africa. That's about as black as you can get. They conquered Spain, and they were the rulers from then until the end. Centuries. There's no question that Spain was ruled by blacks, at least during the latter part of the Middle Ages. The third dynasty, the Almohads, was also a mixed dynasty. The greatest of the Almohad kings was a fellow who they called Al-Mansur, which means the Invincible. His actual name was Yaqub ibn Yusuf, which means Jacob, son of Joseph. Almost like a Jewish name. Al-Mansur arose at a time when the Christian forces were really rearing up and threatening to expel Islam. The Christians put together a huge army of 300,000 men at a place called Alarcos. Al-Mansur called together all the forces of Islam from all across North Africa, all the way to Egypt, and put together an army which beat the Christians at Al-Alarcos in one of the greatest battles in history. Now, Al-Mansur was the son of a man who was described as being of mixed race, but his mother was a full-blooded Negro slave from Senegal or Timbuktu. That makes Al-Mansur at least 75% Negro. And that's about as colored as any black man walking the streets of America today. So the answer to the question is yes, Spain was ruled by blacks, during the period when it was indisputably the cultural, scientific, and educational center of Europe, believe it or not. Now, the slightly out of focus map on the left-hand side of your screen shows the approximate boundaries of the medieval Great Black Sub-Saharan Kingdom, known variously as Ghana and then Mali and later Songhai, all the same kingdom, a rather large kingdom. The yellow color shows the modern nation of Mali, which is of course much smaller. And right in the midst of it is a large black arrow showing the location of Timbuktu, the greatest city of that nation. I'd like to read you something about Timbuktu. This kingdom was originally called the Kingdom of Ghana. From about 300 AD up to the time of the Crusades, Ghana was a Jewish nation. This has been documented by the writings of one Eldad the Danite, whose works constitute the main historical source of information for this time or place. So this was a Jewish kingdom. Did you know that there were Jewish kingdoms in Africa? After North Africa was converted to Islam, an immensely lucrative trade developed between Ghana and the Islamic states to the north. In other words, the empire that was centered in Spain, which we talked about. At first, the Ghanans traded gold, then iron, which was used to make weapons. Eventually, they traded grain, which proved to be the most lucrative of all. Shortly after the year 1000 AD, the kings of Ghana converted to Islam. Subsequently, the city of Timbuktu became the center of trade for the entire world, not just Africa. At that time in history, movement of goods across Europe from land was out of the question, because Europe was a collection of warring barbarian states. So all goods from the east, and that means all goods period, because there weren't nothing being made in the west at that time, all goods from the east were brought to Egypt, where they were loaded onto caravans. The caravan routes all converged at Timbuktu, which, by the 15th century, had become one of the wealthiest cities in the world. From Timbuktu, the goods were transported 1,000 miles to the Atlantic coast, from where they were loaded onto ships bound for Europe. In the 14th century, the University of Sankore was founded at Timbuktu, and this city began to become one of the world's leading centers of academic learning. Ghana, which by then was known as Songhai, came to be known as the Mecca of the Sudan. By the year 1500, this empire in the heart of so-called darkest Africa had become the center of the Islamic world, at a time when the Renaissance in Europe had barely begun. The students of Timbuktu were sent out to the great Muslim universities of Spain, North Africa, and Asia, and the learned men of all races and nationalities were paid handsomely to come into Timbuktu to teach. The commodity which came to be the most profitable object of trade in Timbuktu was not gold or silver or grain, but books. It has been written that there were more books in the library of the University of Sankore than in all the libraries of Europe combined. It is also said that the entire body of male free citizens was literate. Leadership and authority were in hands of the learned scholars of the city. There was a legendary 14th century Muslim traveler named Ibn Battuta. He's kind of like the Marco Polo of the Arab world. And this is what Ibn Battuta had to say about Timbuktu, and I quote, "The inhabitants had a greater abhorrence of injustice than any other people. Neither the man who travels nor he who stays at home has anything to fear from robbers or men of violence." The driving force behind these developments was God and nothing else. Timbuktu arose as a Jewish empire and blossomed under the banners of Islam. There's no question about what the source of greatness was, not black skin color, but God. So maybe you're starting to understand what I mean when I say, whoever you thought you were, you're a Jew. We're out of time now. Please tune in next week when we're going to talk about the relationship between God and enlightenment. Are there two different ultimate realities, or are these two the same? Or maybe they're both wrong. If you want to know the answer to the question, tune in next week and find out. Thank you, and goodbye.